Hey everyone, it is Friday, and that means it is time for my MTG Top 10. This week, for the first time in a while, I'm doing a more Magic history-oriented MTG Top 10. This week, we are looking at the top 10 creatures with Flash. I try to be somewhat empirical in my historical analysis of these cards, and the rankings are based on how many Premier Event top 8s each card has appeared in, and that just means Pro Tours and Grand Prix. Each slide will have the statistics of each card so you can see why I'm ranking cards the way I am. Creatures with Flash are frequently very strong. They get around one of the biggest rules in Magic, that creatures can only be cast in main phases and only at sorcery speed, and on top of that, almost all of them come with a very powerful effect, making the card like a spell and a creature rolled into one, so you get a very efficient creature with a powerful effect. Because of how strong they are, this MTG Top 10 has the most combined top 8 appearances of any MTG Top 10 I've ever done, so get ready for a star-studded list. I was inspired to do this list because right now Standard has a ton of creatures with Flash in it, perhaps the most creatures with Flash ever in a Standard format is what we have right now. And here's a few examples of those. Spell Queller and Elder Deep Fiend are two new cards to Standard right now, and they're both doing very well in Standard. Spell Queller, a lot of people see as sort of format warping, making the Collected Company decks even better than they already are. They're both very strong cards. And there's also Bounding Crassus, who's seen a decent amount of play. None of these cards, though, saw enough play to be anywhere on this list, but I just wanted to show you why it is I decided to do this list. So let's go ahead and get started with number 10. At number 10, I have Boon Satyr. Boon Satyr saw play from the moment he was printed in Standard and stayed being played even when the format changed because of new sets and rotations. As long as he was in Standard, Boon Satyr was seeing play, and that's why he managed to get such solid numbers over the 2-year period, and despite the fact that it only saw play in the one format. He's a great aggressive green card, and greed-based aggro decks were a big deal at the time because of Polukranos. Boon Satyr appeared alongside the Hydra in several decks en route to an impressive 25 top 8s at Premier events, and this guy's only number 10. That should tell you something about the depth of this list. Anyway, the Satyr is nice because he has some flexibility. In the early game, you can just flash him in as an aggressive 3-drop. You can also use him to eat a scary attacker your opponent has, like a Goblin Rabble Master. And in the late game, you can use the Bestow effect to make your Polukranos or other creature even scarier. The great thing about Bestow is that even if the creature who has the aura attached to them dies, Boon Satyr stays in play as a creature. But yeah, in his early days, he appeared in the 2-color aggro decks like Gruul and Silenzia. Once Khans of Tarkir block came onto the scene, he stuck around in Abzan decks. He also was good in any green-based Devotion deck. Basically, as I said, the entire time he was in Standard, he was around, making appearances in top 8s at Grand Prix and Pro Tours. So let's go ahead and move to number 9, where I kind of cheated. I've included 3 cards, but I do have a good reason for it. These 3 cards are part of the same deck for the most part, and while they don't all have the exact same numbers of appearances in top 8s, they have roughly the same number of appearances. I also didn't want fairies taking over this entire list. While Scion of Una wouldn't have actually made the list at all on its numbers alone, Spell Stutter Sprite and Mistbind Click both would have, and spoiler alert, there's another fairy on this list too. It's just not listed here because it has way more appearances than these do, because it shows up in decks that aren't just fairy decks. Anyway, these fairies were part of a fairly dominant Standard deck, and Flash was a central aspect of what made the deck so good. It was an aggro deck, but it had tons of creatures with Flash in it that had powerful effects. Spell Stutter Sprite can counter a lot of spells when the deck is going right, and Mistbind Click can get pretty close to time-walking your opponent. Scion of Una could counter spot removal spells while pumping your entire team. This was what the heart of fairies were, and it was really powerful. These guys all appeared in extended top 8s as well, in addition to appearing in a block and Standard. But unfortunately for Scion of Una, it didn't survive the demise of Extended and the birth of Modern, whereas Spell Stutter Sprite and Mistbind Click continue to pick up a few top 8s there, and that's why they have more top 8s than the Scion of Una does. But fairies, Flash, that's a thing, and they were very strong when they were around. They're probably not going to make a whole lot more top 8s these days, though. On to number 8, where we have Teferi, Mage of Jalfur. Teferi is pretty awesome. He gives all your creatures Flash and shuts all of your opponent's creatures with Flash down as well as their instants. This makes him a nightmare against control opponents in basically every way possible. Control decks all ran this guy too for the mirror, and because it let them leave mana up to counter things if they needed to, but then they could just flash in a win condition if they didn't need to counter something. Teferi's power is really reflected by the fact that he is top 8'd in a total of 4 different formats. He was in any deck with blue in it, more or less, when he was in block and Standard, and he made a few appearances in Extended as well in blue control decks, as well as the Revelark decks that were so good in that format. He showed up in Modern once it came around too. It wasn't uncommon for him to be in Splinter Twin decks before the deck got banned out of existence. And he also shows up in Scape Shift decks and is top 8'd in a Scape Shift deck in Modern as recently as last year. And he's probably not completely done racking up top 8s, but he doesn't get them at a really high rate or anything. So he's probably not moving a whole lot from number 8. At number 7, we have the only card on this list that's actually in Standard right now, and that shows you just how powerful and dominant the card is. The fact that Archangel Avacyn has already racked up so many high finishes shows you how powerful she is. The only other card in this list that is on this list on the strength only of Standard appearances is Boon Satyr, and he clocks in at number 10, and Archangel Avacyn isn't even close to rotating, and she's going to pick up a lot more appearances, and she even comes ahead of multi-format all-stars like the Fairies and Teferi. Avacyn probably, like I said, isn't done climbing the list either, because there's no reason she won't continue to rack up high finishes while she's in Standard. I mean, she got 2 more top 8s just last weekend. Even just the front of Archangel Avacyn is crazy. She'd see play just based on the front. She can allow you to completely destroy your opponent in multiple situations. You know, you can block with everything and kill a bunch of their guys. You can use it to stop a board sweeper, unless it's Languish. But other than that, on top of that, her other side can just clear the board for you. She's definitely one of the most powerful cards in Standard right now, and maybe one of the most pushed cards of all time. And she hasn't seen play anywhere but Standard yet, but she might break into Modern one of these days. And even if she doesn't, though, she's going to rack up a lot more appearances in Standard. At number 6, I cheated a little bit again and included 2 cards, but once again I have a reason. These 2 cards, Deceiver Exarch and Pestermite, saw play primarily together and primarily in only one deck, Splinter Twin. Splinter Twin got banned for a reason, and Deceiver Exarch managed to get a huge number of top 8s in Standard even before it was in Splinter Twin. And then in Modern, Deceiver Exarch and Pestermite worked together in the Splinter Twin decks. The reason these cards went with Splinter Twin is because in conjunction with Splinter Twin, you can either make an infinite number of Deceiver Exarchs or Pestermites and just win the game immediately, and that was the game plan of the deck. But these cards also appeared, believe it or not, in decks that aren't Splinter Twin, which I didn't even remember. I could only think of Splinter Twin when I looked them up, but when I did some research, I saw that Deceiver Exarch saw appearances in another deck that ate the Banhammer, which was Birthing Pod. It tried to get Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker and Exarch into play for the same combo. Pestermite also has some non-Splinter Twin top 8s, as it was included in the Fairy decks discussed earlier, but only in block. It wasn't a good enough, just being a Fairy on its own, it wasn't good enough for the extended or modern versions. So, on we go to number 5, where we have Avian Mind Sensor. It's a rarity on this list because it has seen play in virtually every format except for when it was in Standard. The real strength of the Mind Sensor is in a format with fetch lands, and Legacy, Old Extended, and Modern all have them, and that's where this card shines. And the Standard it existed in just didn't have fetch lands, so there wasn't a real motivation to be playing it. Flashing this in response to your opponent, cracking a fetch land can be backbreaking for your opponent. If your opponent does not have one of the lands that they can fetch in the top 4 cards of their library, that you basically just destroyed one of their lands. Because it's such a strong card, lots of toolbox decks have run singleton copies, so Birthing Pod decks, Court of Calling decks, and so on. And it also shows up in most Hate Bears, Death and Taxes type decks that try to cripple the metagame. Avian Mind Sensor has 2 top 8 finishes as recently as a few months ago, so I don't think it is done racking them up, not unless people stop playing fetch lands, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. So let's go to number 4, where we have another Future Sight card. It's fitting because Future Sight is actually when they first started making Flash a keyword. Before that, cards just said, this creature can be cast anytime you could cast an instant. And here is when they finally decided to put Flash on a card, and Venser is also from Future Sight, and he's had a pretty impressive career. He's a great tempo card because he not only bounces a creature or spell, preferably costing more than your Venser, you also get a 2/2 body that can at least block for you. He appeared in a lot of the same decks that an earlier inclusion on the list, Teferi appeared on. Unlike Teferi, though, it saw even more dominance in Extended, appearing in most blue-based decks in the format, including Counterbalance, Blue-Green Tron, Revelator, Tezzeret, and even Merfolk and Fairies. You have to be pretty good to show up in a tribal deck where you aren't even the tribal creature type that the deck is built around. It also has some pedigree in Legacy, where it has top 8'd multiple times in Miracle decks. It even has a few appearances in Modern in the Esper Stoneblade decks. It has a Legacy top 8 in a Miracles deck as recently as last month, so Venser could definitely keep climbing. So now it is time to move into our top 3. If you think Venser's 49 top 8s are impressive, The top 3 cards on this list completely blow him out of the water. All 3 of them have more than double the number of top 8s Venser does. They're basically in a league of their own, outpacing any of the cards that fall 4 through 10 on this list by quite a lot, probably never to be caught. So let's go ahead and take a look at number 3. At number 3, we have Restoration Angel. It made some top 8s in the block format, and then was a completely dominant card in Standard. When she was in Standard, multiple decks running her appeared in every top 8 of every Standard Pro Tour, showing you how dominant she was. Sort of like Archangel Avacyn in Standard right now, if your deck had white in it, you found a way to shove her into it. She has amazing stats for her cost and allows you to either save a guy from your opponent's removal, or abuse an Enter the Battlefield trigger, or both. What's more is she enabled combos with Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker for infinite damage, so she also appeared in Birthing Pod decks in Modern as a pod target. Because she worked well with Kiki, she also appeared in Splinter Twin decks from time to time in Modern, as well as in Toolbox decks like Kiki Cord. Restoration Angel has 100 top 8 appearances, with one at Grand Prix Charlotte just a few months ago, so she is likely to add to that number. And again, that's more than double the appearances of our number 4 card, Venser. But there are 2 cards with even more top 8s than she has. Let's go ahead and move to number 2. And here's the fairy on our list that appeared not only in fairy decks, but also many decks with blue in them across many formats, which is why it outpaces its fairy brethren by so much. It's at number 2, while the rest of them are at number 9. Vendilion Click is an incredible card. It provides an efficient body in the air that can beat the opponent down, while also disrupting their game plan, because you can take away their best card when you cast it. In Extended, it showed up in Tezzerator, Dark Depths, combo decks, Counterbalance decks, Mystical Teaching decks, and Scapeshift decks, as well as more obvious fairies. Once Modern came into being, it continued to succeed, showing up in the obvious fairy decks, as well as Splinter Twin decks, Storm decks, and Infect decks, despite not having Infect itself. After Delver emerged, Vendilion Click found another long-term home in Modern, and that's probably where it's seen its most top 8s. It was also in the temporarily dominant Cobblade deck. It continued to find success in Counterbalance decks, even after Extended disappeared, but it was in Legacy, so it has several wins there, including in Miracles decks, as well as the aforementioned Counterbalance decks. Its card draw effect is incredibly good in a Miracles deck as well, because you can use it to make yourself get rid of a card and then just draw whatever miracle you know is on top of your deck because of your top. Vendilion Click has an amazing 134 top 8 appearances in Premier events. In the last year, it has top 8s in Legacy and Modern, so it isn't done yet. The question is, will it ever overtake the number 1 card on this list? And you've probably guessed what it is if you've gotten this far, and that is Snapcaster Mage. This guy is ridiculous. He grants you incredible card advantage by allowing you to cast spells from your graveyard. Snapcaster Maging for a Lightning Bolt or a Mana Leak is a very powerful play. His power has allowed him to be the best flash creature in all of Magic's history, seeing play in multiple formats. Obviously, when he was in Standard, any blue control deck tried to play him. He also showed up in Counterbalance decks, in Miracle decks, in Legacy, and basically every blue deck in Modern, especially Splinter Twin, Delver, and Scapeshift. Snapcaster Mage has a total of 153 top 8 appearances, and racked up several just last month at 2 different Legacy Grand Prix. He's not done, and it will be interesting to see if Vendilion Click can ever pass him. I kind of don't think the Click will. Anyway, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to click the like button. If you have any questions or comments, you can post them below. And if you want to make sure you get an MTG Top 10 every week, click the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.